Let me give you the real, unfiltered image of what a Crusader siege truly was. Forget the glamorous scenes from films. The reality was far darker, far more horrifying than most can even imagine. Before we go further, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. It's always fascinating to see this brutal slice of history connecting people across the world. Once you understand the truth, you'll realize just how hopelessly unprepared any of us would be for that world. These weren't swift campaigns with clean victories. They were long, drawn-out nightmares, marathons of human suffering, breeding grounds for disease and starvation, and theaters of death so vast they would make modern health experts shudder. Take the Siege of Acre, 1189 to 1191, a brutal example of everything terrifying about Crusader warfare. This wasn't a skirmish measured in days or weeks. No, this was almost 2 relentless years of hell on earth, where 2 powerful forces, Christian Crusaders and Saladin's Muslim armies, locked themselves in a deadly stalemate, neither able to deliver the final blow. The Crusaders couldn't fully take the coastal city, and Saladin's troops couldn't drive them away. Supplies trickled in by sea to both camps, sustaining the slaughter just long enough to keep hope alive while men died by the tens of thousands. But here's what most people get wrong. The majority of those deaths didn't happen on the battlefield. They weren't glorious charges or cinematic duels. The real killer was the slow collapse of everything necessary for life. By the end, over 100,000 Crusaders were dead. Yes, 100,000, and most of them never even saw an enemy blade. The winter of 1190 to 1191 was especially merciless. Disease ripped through the camps like a scythe. Even the nobility, who had the best food, the best tents, and the most skilled physicians money could buy, were not spared. Theobald of Blois, Stephen of Sancerre, and Frederick of Swabia, names that carried power across Europe, fell within days of each other. If those men, with all their wealth and influence, couldn't survive, what chance would you have with nothing but the clothes on your back? Contemporary accounts paint scenes almost too grotesque to believe. When a horse dropped dead, crowds would swarm the carcass, tearing at it like starving wolves. A single dead horse became worth more than it had ever been alive. And yes, people even fought over the entrails. Imagine that. The guts of an animal were a delicacy. Food prices became surreal. 1 silver penny, serious money at the time, might buy you a single egg or a tiny handful of beans. A sack of grain could cost 100 gold coins, a fortune beyond most people's wildest dreams. Hunger stripped away dignity. Soldiers chewed on bones, gnawed at grass, boiled leather straps. Anything to quiet the relentless gnawing in their stomachs. But it didn't stop there. The dead themselves became tools of war. There were so many corpses that they were carted to Acre's moat and dumped in, forming makeshift landfill just to strengthen siege works. Pause and think about that. Human bodies piled and rotting under the Mediterranean sun, turned into part of the battleground. And then there were the diseases. We're talking about illnesses far beyond the mild stomach bugs of modern life. Parasites like Entamoeba histolytica and Giardia duodenalis turned strong men into husks, racked with unstoppable, bloody diarrhea and dehydration that could kill in days. Dysentery didn't just weaken, it annihilated. Scurvy was another silent executioner. Lacking vitamin C, the body literally unraveled. Teeth dropped out, old scars split open, joints ballooned with pain, and black bruises blossomed across the skin. It killed 1/6 of the French army during the 5th Crusade, and even St. Louis, the King of France himself, succumbed to disease on the 7th. If a king with access to the best rations and care could die like that, you can be certain no ordinary person would last long. Archaeologists today still find traces of this nightmare. Contaminated wells, trash pits filled with bones, rusted surgical tools. Grim reminders of a world where life and death balanced on the edge of a blade and a loaf of bread. When archaeologists excavated the Hospital of St. John at Acre, the findings were as grim as they were revealing. Even the wealthiest Crusaders, nobles in fine armor, men of faith and privilege, were crawling with parasites. Roundworms, whipworms, fish tapeworms, creatures feasting inside their bodies. And this wasn't a rare misfortune. This was the standard reality of life during a siege. But parasites were only the beginning. What's far more chilling is the mental and physical nightmare of siege warfare itself. Modern studies show that nearly 1 in 5 Crusaders, 19% of the nobility, not the peasants, not the camp followers, but knights and clergy with the best medieval medicine, died not by sword or arrow, but by starvation, infection, and disease. Think about that. People with resources, food reserves, and knowledge still wasted away like common beggars. And the sanitation? If you think medieval castles were romantic stone fortresses, think again. Their advanced systems for waste were little more than crude holes in walls, latrines that dropped human filth straight into moats or down sheer drops. During the siege of Château Gallard in 1203, the French actually seized part of the castle by climbing through a latrine shaft. Imagine that, an entire battle turned by a toilet chute. The very system meant to keep filth out became a pathway for invasion. Sieges turned strongholds into cesspools. Moats, meant to keep enemies out, became stagnant pits filled with excrement, rotting flesh, and contaminated water. Hygiene broke down completely. Disease ran rampant because medieval armies didn't understand what we now take for granted, that filth breeds sickness. They had no concept of bacteria, no knowledge of waterborne pathogens, and no means to stop the epidemics that ripped through their ranks. The ugly truth is this: you wouldn't go down in a blaze of glory on some battlefield. You wouldn't die charging the walls with a sword raised high. You'd wither away slowly, surrounded by decay, collapsing under the weight of hunger and infection. And when you finally fell, your body would join the mountains of the dead rotting in the heat. And this is before we even get to the weapons. Forget the polished swords and gleaming lances of the movies. Siege warfare was brutal engineering, machines of terror designed to break both stone and flesh. The medieval mind built engines not to duel but to annihilate. Take the trebuchet, the crown jewel of medieval siegecraft. These monstrous machines could fling 300-pound stones over the length of 3 football fields with devastating accuracy. And they weren't just tossing rocks, they were hurling death itself. Carved stones designed to splinter walls, disease-ridden carcasses, severed heads, even prisoners used as ammunition. At Kaffa in 1346, plague-infected corpses were launched over city walls, essentially unleashing one of history's first acts of biological warfare. That very outbreak helped spread the Black Death across Europe. Imagine standing on a wall, watching the sky rain disease. Then there were the rams, massive iron-shod logs hidden inside protective frames, smashing again and again into gates and walls. Each blow a drumbeat of terror. Chroniclers wrote of their pounding rhythm, a sound that shattered morale long before the stone itself gave way. And finally, the siege tower, a nightmare on wheels. These towering wooden fortresses, sometimes 7 stories high, rolled straight toward your walls, packed with soldiers ready to pour down on you like an avalanche. Picture it. A looming shadow creeping closer, a mobile death machine filled with armed men ready to descend from above. This was siege warfare. Not glorious, not romantic, but a slow, grinding hell of filth, famine, fear, and unstoppable machines. Think you could survive it? Think again. The psychological toll of medieval siege warfare was often more crushing than the physical destruction. Entire garrisons, hardened men who had sworn to fight to the last, sometimes surrendered without a fight, simply because the terror of what awaited them was too much to bear. And nothing struck more fear than the infamous Greek fire. Imagine a weapon so horrifying, it turned the battlefield into a blazing inferno. This was not just any incendiary, it was the medieval equivalent of napalm, a petroleum-based mixture that clung to armor, shields, flesh, anything it touched, and burned hotter and longer than ordinary flames. Water? Useless. It only spread the fire further. When the Byzantine armies unleashed this nightmare during sieges, it was like watching hell itself pour from their ships and battlements. Walls of fire rolled toward enemy lines, devouring everything in their path. Chronicles speak of the chilling sounds that followed. The agonized screams of men burning alive, a sound so dreadful that survivors swore it never left their minds. But not every deadly innovation came in the form of massive war machines. Some were small, almost unassuming, but just as terrifying. Enter the medieval crossbow. Sleek, portable, and deadly precise. This weapon was the silent assassin of the battlefield. A trained crossbowman could punch a steel-tipped bolt through chainmail and even the earliest plate armor, turning the strongest knight into a fallen soldier in seconds. These weren't short-range toys either. Well-built medieval crossbows boasted draw weights exceeding 150 pounds, launching bolts at deadly speeds across distances of 300 to 400 yards. At that range, an advancing army could be cut down before they ever saw the enemy's face. And siege warfare didn't just dominate the skies and walls. It went underground. Medieval engineers turned the earth itself into a weapon. Mining was their secret war. A slow, terrifying process where teams tunneled beneath castle walls, propping up massive sections of earth with timber supports. Then, when the time was right, they'd set the supports ablaze, collapsing entire chunks of fortifications. Now, imagine being a defender on those walls, hearing the faint, rhythmic sound of picks and shovels beneath your feet. Every creak, every vibration could mean the ground was about to give way. When defenders tried to stop them, it turned into a brutal form of combat most people today can't even imagine. Countermining led to close-quarters battles in total darkness, where men fought with daggers and clubs in tunnels barely big enough to crawl through. No banners, no glory, just pitch-black chaos. One of the most chilling examples came during the siege of Rochester Castle in 1215. King John's forces dug deep under the massive keep and, in a move straight out of a nightmare, used the fat from 40 pigs to fuel a fire hot enough to bring down an entire corner of the fortress. The defenders who survived the collapse faced a horrifying choice: burn alive in the ruins or surrender to almost certain execution. And if you think that was the worst of it, starvation warfare was an even crueler weapon. Sieges could drag on for months, cutting off food and water until defenders were nothing more than hollow-eyed skeletons. When desperation took over, humanity vanished. During the First Crusade, at the siege of Mirat el-Numan, the Crusaders' hunger drove them beyond reason. Chroniclers record the unthinkable. They roasted the bodies of the fallen and boiled human flesh in cooking pots. This wasn't madness. This was survival stripped to its ugliest form. Even the defenders were far from gentle. Castles were designed to be killing machines. Murder holes lined gateways and corridors, giving defenders the perfect angle to unleash horror. Imagine being trapped under a gatehouse while defenders poured boiling oil, molten lead, or quicklime that burned skin and blinded eyes. The screams echoed across the fields, a grim warning to anyone daring to come closer. And from the high walls, engines of defense like mangonels and ballistas turned fortresses into artillery platforms. They rained down stones, bolts, and incendiaries with terrifying precision. Every approach to the castle could become a death trap, and every sound of creaking timber or winding ropes promised destruction. This was medieval siege warfare, not the romanticized duels of knights in shining armor, but a world of fire, disease, hunger, and ingenuity where terror was as potent a weapon as steel. These weren't wild, hopeless last stands by desperate defenders. No, these were cold, calculated strategies designed to crush invading armies. Medieval commanders turned defense into an art form, building fortifications and artillery capable of dismantling massive siege engines piece by piece, all while bleeding the enemy dry. Look at the siege of Kenilworth Castle in 1266. It dragged on for 6 long months, not because the attackers were incompetent, but because the defenders' machines were so deadly that every attempt to hold siege positions became a blood-soaked gamble. But here's the thing. The longer these conflicts went on, the darker and more brutal they became. Medieval siege warfare wasn't static. It evolved like a living thing. Every advancement in offense sparked an even more ruthless response from defenders, and every new defensive measure pushed attackers to design more terrifying weapons. It was an arms race of pure destruction, each side forcing the other to climb a ladder of brutality with no way back down. And this wasn't just about catapults, walls, and arrows. When you stood on a medieval battlefield, you weren't just facing one weapon, you were facing centuries of perfected methods of human annihilation. The archaeological evidence tells stories that history books can only hint at. Dig up the soil around the great Crusader sieges and you'll find bones marked with horror. Skulls caved in by maces, ribs shattered by crossbow bolts, and charred remains that bear the unmistakable signature of Greek fire. These were not clean, noble deaths. They were bodies broken by a civilization's most advanced tools for killing. The sheer savagery of it all would overwhelm the mind long before the body failed. Modern people, with our safety-first world and our faith in hospitals, would shatter psychologically just standing there, watching it unfold. So next time you feel a rush of pride about your survival skills, or you imagine yourself thriving in some medieval world, think again. Think of Acre, where tens of thousands of corpses piled up, so many that the dead were used as building material. Think of King Louis IX, one of the most powerful rulers of Europe, wasting away and dying not in battle, but of scurvy, helpless despite all his wealth and resources. Consider this, even the most privileged nobles, with access to the best doctors medieval Europe could offer, carried a 1 in 5 chance of dying simply from disease during these sieges. You wouldn't last. Not a chance. Because this wasn't war as you know it, it was organized human destruction. Every weapon, every tactic, every disease worked together in a nightmare cycle. The fire would terrify you. The starvation would hollow you out. The plague and filth would finish what the siege towers began. And your mind? It would break long before your body fell. The difference between their world and ours is more than just a few centuries. It's a chasm that can't be crossed. We live with clean water, medicine, technology, and laws that, at least in theory, protect life. They lived without any of that. What they had instead was sheer endurance, the ability to treat pain, hunger, and loss as part of daily life. The men and women who endured medieval sieges weren't merely survivors. They were hardened in conditions so brutal they almost feel unreal to us now. And this isn't meant to insult modern people. It's the opposite. It's a reminder of how ruthless those times were, how siege warfare could strip away everything human and leave nothing but a fight for survival. These weren't just battles. They were events that tested the limits of body, mind, and spirit, and they succeeded in breaking many. So, next time you complain about a long queue or a slow Wi-Fi connection, pause and be grateful. Grateful that you'll never have to survive weeks of starvation, drink foul water, or watch disease sweep through your walls while enemy catapults rain death outside. History's answer is clear. In the face of a Crusader siege, almost no one would walk away. What about you? If you were thrown back into the 12th century, could you handle even a day of it? Let us know in the comments. And if this glimpse into medieval endurance fascinated you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Vassal Truths. We bring you the untold battles, forgotten heroes, and raw truths of history. Don't miss what's coming next.